Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to the comic shop. It's BZ Comics. If you've been keeping up with my shorts, you'll be pretty aware that I'm making the helmet from Hulu's Prey. This is from the Alien vs. Predator series. This is going to be part one to the video. I'm not going to be showing you guys too much of the assembly. This video is just going to be basically showing you, as you can see with all of these pieces, how to print these out, how to get the right orientation, how to cut some of these up if you have a smaller printer or even a bigger printer, just to make it quite easy for you. Let's get to it. Okay, so first things first, this helmet is not for the weak. There is a lot that goes into this helmet. Not only from just 3D printing, but also to finish work, painting, to if you want it to look screen accurate, the weathering that you're gonna have to do, magnets, the whole nine. Let's go ahead and jump into it. So first things first, we'll start with what's easier, which is the inner helmet. The inner helmet is just like any other file. It's just a couple different pieces, a couple different covers. They even give you a file for dreads, which is amazing. I didn't print those out. In part 3, you'll see exactly how I make the dreads. But just looking at these three files that are used here, first we're going to have just the main faceplate. These hooks, you'll see exactly why they put these hooks on when I get to the outer parts of the helmet. Besides the faceplate, you're going to also have the back cover. The back cover is where the dreads are going to go into. Again, you can 3D print those dreads. I didn't. They're all different types of filaments that you can choose to use it. You don't have to use regular PLA. There are flexible filaments. There's a plethora of different filaments that you can actually go about using to get these done. And then you have the jaw. Now these parts can all be basically printed in one shot on most printers. That's the one thing that I liked about this file, is that even though there are a lot of parts, even if you're trying to make this on an Ender 3, you could definitely do these all in one shot. I did not, because that would take even more time, a lot of support, and a lot of filament. So basically what I'll show you guys is the cuts that I made with these three parts, just to make life a lot easier. As I've mentioned before, the reason I make these cuts is to 1, save time and filament, 2, so I don't have to use a ton of supports, and 3, because orientating these is a lot easier. There's a lot less, like I said, supports. There's a lot less time that you have to take with them. So the faceplate and the dread holder, these are the two simplest cuts that I made. Slicer software that I'm using in order to make these cuts. Now there are other slicing softwares that you can use, but I'm on Apple, I'm on a Mac, so this is what's available to me. So cutting off the main faceplate, which some of this I kind of feel like why were these parts added in some parts, because you don't see these, which you'll see more in part 3. Some of these parts you're not really gonna even see within the completion of the mask, so it's like, why didn't they just pretty much make 1 or 2 shells so that everything can kind of go into it? But like I said, this faceplate was needed because it has these hooks and it connects to not only the mouthpiece, but it also connects to the backing plate. So you'll see the magnet ports here in the back. Not only, so this is where the dread holder is going to be connected, and then these 3 here is where the jaw is going to be connected with magnets. So you also need a lot of magnets for this. But this is basically how I made this first cut. I just threw it in here. Wherever the line ended, I just went ahead and performed that cut there. Simple. These 2 parts that I cut, obviously I printed them right side up with the part that I cut. Basically how you see this green model here. That's basically how I laid this one out. And for this, the bottom of the face, I just flipped this upside down. That way I have all of this surface here, other than printing it straight up with only the teeth. I printed it this side down on the bed and let both of those print that way. Simple, easy cuts, not too much to those parts. This dread holder is just about the same. It's a pretty simple cut that you can make. You can kind of move it up or down however so that you want. But I just made sure that I didn't cut like any of the holes within it. So I just basically brought this line down to about here. So that way I was just under all the holes, because I didn't want to have to solder each piece of these holes back together. That would have been a lot. So basically, like right about here is where I made the cut again, so that way I saved each of those holes and saved myself a million bits of time. And then I printed these just how basically they're sitting here. So obviously, just like with the mask, this part that's here on the back, I flipped this upside down. Obviously I want more surface touching the bed, so again I wouldn't print this in this orientation where basically you can kind of like slant this a little bit, but you might still need some supports. So I just made it easier on myself to flip this upside down. Again, you can see the magnet spots, and then this part here, I printed it exactly how you see here. I did put just a little bit of supports at the bottom here, so just draw your eye to where the arrow is. So where this little part comes here, that's the only place where I put supports on both sides. So the mouth actually rotated because, as you can see, the back of the mouth isn't actually on the surface. But looking over at this, this is kind of, I wish I had did this way rather than what I actually did, because as you see in my file, the teeth, some of the tops of the teeth I actually had to cut off because this was flat, and where you see that this cut is, it was a little bit lower down. But I honestly think that this would be a lot better. So you can see, if you keep your eye where my cursor is, about 111.8 on the z-axis is how far it came down. This is all at 100%. Let me go ahead and make that cut. That looks like a much better cut than what I actually did. And you can separate these models. Yeah, that's a million times better. The only issue that I had, and the only reason why I cut some of the mouth, was because where these teeth come in, they would have had to be supports there. And I think as I was slicing it, the supports really weren't catching that piece. Not only that, under here, so the connection, it was just like a little bit scary. But if you are doing this, I would definitely say go ahead and do it in this orientation because you can save a lot more. You can flip this jaw upside down and then print it like that. So if I was to do this again, which I'm not, this is the way that I would definitely go about it. Okay, so now we're stepping into the outer part of the helmet. So I pretty much go shell by shell. So this shell here, as you're seeing like on the face of the prey helmet, it had those bars. And like I said, now you can see the hooks that's basically going to attach to the next part. So that's basically what this shell does. And you can see there are more magnet ports. So basically the shell that goes over this is going to be able to attach, and that shell is going to have like all the smaller pieces, which there are a lot of smaller pieces. Now for me personally, I don't see why they made it look like this. So I don't know why they have these two gaps here, and then you have to print these parts separately. That part I honestly didn't get. I honestly did, I don't know why they didn't just make this one whole solid piece. I didn't print these two smaller pieces out, so we're not even going to talk about those. This is the main part that I printed out, and I'll show you guys the slices that I made to actually print this. So for this file, I pretty much made a 3-part cut, and most of the cuts that I made were pretty much whatever they recommended me. The main thing that I wanted to focus on was that I wasn't making cuts that would be like flimsy. Basically explain that. So what I mean is I didn't want to make a cut somewhere like here and then have this part here have to come out like in a separate piece. Basically I just wanted to make it as smooth as possible as far as cuts, something that would be easy to assemble. So for the first bottom part, I went just exactly right there. Again, this is 176.4 on the z-axis if you're using slicer. Again, my main thing is making sure that there's a solid base, something that can sit flat on the bed. So that's again what I mean by making something a flimsy cut. With this part here, you can see that there are these two sides. Now this I did have to print some supports with along just a little bit of the inner side and some of the front. Those supports are mainly just to ensure that nothing bad happened while I was making this. With this print, there's so much that I had to do that I didn't want anything to fail, just like kind of slowed me down from the process. So I put supports on that part just to ensure that everything went perfectly good. Now you can print out just these two pieces if you want, But again, I make cuts to save time and to make things a lot quicker. So I not only did that cut, but I did another cut to this top piece as well, just to make my life a little bit easier and just to make sure that there were no fails, because this little cleft at the top, if I were to do it that way, this cleft at the top, I would have had to put a lot of supports there. This would have made it over a day and about 6 to 10 hours, which I really didn't want to do. So basically what I did was just made this cut that you see here. That's 88.2 on the z-axis from what we just previously did. And from there, I got these 3 separate parts. So that, for me, made life easier. So I had the top piece here, I had this middle section here, and I had the bottom part of the nose. And all of them, as you can see, have a good surface to where that they can sit on the bed quite easily. Now I still did have to put supports under this part, but as you can see, it's a lot closer to the bed, so it wasn't as crazy. And another thing that you want to watch out for when you're making these cuts is that you're not cutting anywhere along these hooks. These hooks have to basically stay exactly where they are. I put supports on these hooks as well because I wanted them to come out strong. I didn't want them to be flimsy as they print, because as you can see, there's overhang. So the printer would start printing the bottom of this and then work its way up. If there were no supports there, obviously it wouldn't be able to print those, meaning a fail. Again, I didn't want any type of fail, so I did make sure to put supports on this part. And then finally, this rail here was the last piece that I needed as far as the shells. This piece, they have a lot of these smaller ports, which I do have some magnets. You'll see more of those magnets in part 3. I thought these were more so going to be magnet holes. I do have some magnets again that fit these small holes, but where they align up on the mast, I'm not sure why they're holes, but they're definitely not for magnets, because there's no wear on the shell that I just showed you prior, because this piece goes on the shell that I just previously did. There's no points where I could put on that shell magnets to coincide with this. So in part 3 as well, you'll see exactly how I assemble everything and how I attach everything, because there's a little bit that goes into it. But this shell here, there wasn't really too much to this part. Printing it like this, as you can see, again, would take a lot of support. And not only would it take a lot of support, I didn't want to have a lot of supports on this to where I would have to snap some supports off and then possibly snapping this, because this is a very flimsy type rail. As you add the inner shells, there is a lot more strength that comes into this. This part actually does get a little bit heavy. Yes, you can make this a little bit more with infill, 20%, 15%. As you can see, I typically go anywhere from 10 to 15. But even so, with doing that and keeping this a whole, look at the orientation that this is in. Just imagine how long that would take to print fully with supports. It's about 3 days that you're looking at. It's not something that I want to do, especially when printing something this big. I feel like that's tearing that printer up. That's my thermistor that can mess up. That's a lot of things, because again, it's not just this piece that I'm printing. It's this piece with other shells, with the smaller pieces that go into this, the mouth, so on and so forth. And I have other prints that I want to get to as well. So like I said, I make my life easier by making cuts like this. Let's get to it. Okay, so for this part here, there really wasn't much to worry about. The main thing that I wanted to make sure of is that where I sliced wasn't going to cause a deform in the shell, because I don't want to have to snap or solder some of this support away. As you can see, this is already thin enough. I didn't want to have a piece or pieces where this slice would happen and then there would be an issue. 2, I want to make sure that this part here, this overhang, didn't get affected by the cut as well. So let's get into how I cut it. But this is also what I didn't want to happen as well. This is what I was mentioning, is where you see this part here aside from everything else. So I brought this down a little bit more, just so it's all one piece and not excluding this, because that would be kind of weird to have to attach that along with it. Okay, so as you can see, 100 was the magic number. Again, all I did was flip this upside down, because again, if you look at the bottom of this, that's not really enough to hold on to everything, and that's going to cause a fail. So let's go ahead and make that cut. And I still kept this back rail on its own, and boom. I still did have to put supports on both of these, but removing them I was very delicate, because again, I didn't want this rail or removing supports to snap one of these rails. Again, these are a little flimsy. Breaking one of these again would have caused a deformity that I didn't want to happen during that mask. In doing so, 100 is definitely where I did it, because I remember these little lumps, these little pieces here did break off, but I was able to solder them back in without causing too much of an issue, without causing too much of a deform. So if you do want to go a little bit more than 100, just so you don't get these little small nubs here, then I would say that's about the only adjustment that I would have made. Other than that, this came out perfectly. Okay, so for the rail that I just showed you, there's about 15 pieces like this that you're gonna have to print out. They don't all look like this, of course, so you can kind of see them here. They're all different sizes. The good thing about it though is they fit in perfectly. I didn't have, none of them came out deformed. That's one thing that like I continuously say I like about DO3D. It's like they take the extra time to make sure everything's gonna work out for you after you print it. So not only did the magnets line up, so when I put everything together, they just snap together, but these pieces came out perfectly. They fit in the mask perfectly, and they fit into a way that you can either glue them in or solder them in. Like I always say, I don't really like glue, so I soldered them in, so that worked perfectly. The only thing that caused not really an issue, but the only thing that took time is that I'll show you the orientation that I put these in. Basically, I printed these all flat with supports. So it was like the rail that you see within here was basically enclosed like a cocoon inside of all the supports. So it did take me some time. I had to use the snips to cut off all the supports. The first one that I did, that I removed from my bed and took off like the outer ring of supports, so like the supports that you can see the red on the undercarriage of it, so that overlaying flap, I took those supports off thinking that that was it, not knowing that this rail was enclosed in supports, and I tried to put that into the mask or that rail and it didn't work. So that's something to let you guys know. You're gonna have to pretty much break that out of the cocoon shell, and that takes time. But it wasn't too bad. But it was a lot, but it wasn't too bad. So like I said, there's a total of 15 of these pieces. That's basically what I did, was laid these all down and printed them out just like that. So let's go ahead and take a look at how those came out. And just to keep this video moving along, that way it's not like super repetitive. That's why I like showed you that part, so that way you can see exactly how many I put on my bed and how I spaced them out and how I pretty much orientated them and printed them out. I did it basically in little batches. So for the batches that I did, I basically did it in a row. So for this first row, there was 3 of them. So that's why you see 3 on the first one. And then I did this whole row, and then I did this whole row, and then there was 1 more or 2 more in this section of those by itself. So that wasn't too bad. Like I said, the main thing is removing the supports was a lot. This is the outer shell, so the rail that I just showed you. All of these, or the first big tray that I showed you that had like the 2 big gaps in it, this is what all of these smaller pieces are going to basically connect to. So you'll see for this piece that I have in the back, that's obviously going to go on the top and go around the ring. The reason I'm showing you guys this is because the rail that I showed you, where all the smaller pieces attach to, that part doesn't have anything to attach to the helmet. You're basically going to be using these pieces. These connect to that railing with all the smaller pieces, and these are what's going to connect to these magnet ports. So just keep that in mind. Like I said, this piece in the back is going to connect to the shell. Again, you can solder it on, it's quite easy. And then that's going to snap on. So that shell is basically going to be held on by these, is basically what I'm telling you. As you can obviously see, this is the nose. So this nose, this top piece will fit right into that shell perfectly. I'll show you guys that basically in part 3, but I'll show you a little snippet of it here as well. But this nose clicks into this. These two sides, so there's this part here. Good, I'm glad it's showing. This part is the laser. So it goes onto the side of the shell and connects to this magnet that you see here. Again, some people can learn things by communication. Some people have to see. This is why I'm basically doing a 3-part section, because to have this all in one video would have been crazy. But this here, you'll see it has one magnet port right here, and that's basically going to attach to this. Same with this part, it's going to attach to this. So basically what I'm saying is, from here, again, I did not print these two centerpieces. I don't know why it's like that. But these pieces here are basically what's going to connect that shell to this part. As you can see, like I said, the little dots on that shell that I had showed you guys, there are no little dots that match up on this part where that shell could actually like be magnetized. So if you're in this helmet and you're a little confused on how that's all going to connect, it's these pieces here. Okay, so I just want to show you guys this. That way I'm not confusing anybody. This is the shell. And this is basically how I soldered everything together. As you can see what I'm saying, these smaller little dots, there's nothing on here to connect those. So you can see I have one magnet port here for this section, and one of those magnets fell out. A couple of those magnets fell out, so I got to re-glue those back in there. But it's all just to basically show you guys more of a visual. So when I flip this over, this magnet port here is going to go to this. This magnet port here is going to go to this. And then the nose is going to all be connected here. So again, this is all just to show you a visual that, again, this shell, or this ring here where all the smaller pieces connect, it's not going to be what's connecting. These smaller shells, or these smaller pieces, are what's going to connect to this part. So this, again, is basically showing you how everything is going to come together. You can see the rails are matching with the hooks, and then this goes on to that all together. So you kind of get a sneak peek into part 3 of seeing this all together. And this is a little bit of a sneak peek into how it's coming all together. So like I said, in part 3 and in part 2, you guys will get to see more of the assembly of how I put everything together, how I started to paint some of this, and how I inserted the magnets as well. As always, it's BZ Comics. Definitely, if you like this video, or if you're going to attempt this video yourself, hit the like button and hit the subscribe button, so that way you can see part 2 and part 3 of how I do everything else, and you can make this your own. Besides that, peace.